Chapter 13. The dream of Grayson appearing at my door returned that night in full force, and this time with much more indecency than before. When I awoke, my entire body was hot in a way that it had never been after a mere dream. I had to throw the covers off just to cool down, closing my eyes and trying to clear the thick haze that had settled over my brain. I lifted a hand to my forehead and pushed strands of hair away, finding them damp with sweat. I couldn't get a hold of myself. Ever since what had nearly happened between us, my head had been filled with almost nothing but him. The eyes shining that bluish grey, the muscles rippling across his scarred chest and arms, the lips that had so clearly longed to meet mine. I kept wondering what they tasted like. They were probably nothing like the soft, boyish lips I was used to kissing back home. No, they'd be rough, salty, dry from the constant battering they received from the wind and seawater. Their coarseness against mine might even hurt. The thought excited me, twisted deep in my stomach, and coiled down between my legs, where I felt myself growing warmer. Exhaling, I threw both hands up to my forehead and rubbed at my eyes furiously, as if to scrub the thoughts from my mind. No. But I couldn't keep from imagining it, and I couldn't keep the stirring out of my chest or the quickening of my breath. With my head swimming, I eventually returned to a fitful sleep, waking later that morning to the insistent creaking of the ship. The dreams had been relentless. Even with my eyes closed, I still felt as though I had one foot in them. They threatened to overtake me again before I was interrupted by a short knock on the door. Jerked back to reality, I dragged myself out of bed to open it, expecting to see my breakfast sitting just outside, like every morning. Much to my surprise, however, I found one of the crew standing there. Thomas, I thought his name was, but I was unsure. The pirate, who was possibly named Thomas, looked rather anxious to be standing there, swallowing as I pulled the door all the way open.
"Morning, your ladyship,"
he said, unsuccessfully trying to keep his eyes from wandering towards my chest.
"Captain McFarley invites you to breakfast in his quarters."
My stomach twisted. I had been trying not to consider how much Captain McFarley might have seen, or what he might have thought, but it seemed I would be forced to confront it sooner rather than later. Giving a short nod, I tried to push down my anxiety. But what did it matter if he'd seen us? Nothing had happened. There was nothing to be ashamed about. I changed into one of the other stolen dresses, a simple one made of dark blue linen. I had been enjoying the feeling of loose-fitting clothes over the course of this voyage, savouring my freedom from corsets while I had the chance. Dread took root in the back of my mind at the notion that I'd be forced to dress properly again once I was returned home. If I was returned home. With that cheerful thought, I made my way to Captain McFarley's quarters, doing my best to disguise the apprehension on my face. Following my gentle knock,
"Milady,"
I heard a call from within to enter. I let myself in, smoothing out my dress. As was usually the case when I was invited to his cabin, Captain McFarley had a variety of food laid out on his table, and was already sitting down to eat. Today's selection included a loaf of bread, preserves, some sun-dried meats, and a few precious citrus fruits. Captain McFarley looked up at me with a toothy grin.
"Good morning, Miss Williams,"
he said, ever polite.
"You're looking well."
I forced a smile, and had a seat at my place opposite him, eyeing the oranges. I was surprised to see them. Fresh fruit was rationed carefully whenever they had it, and I had assumed that the majority of their stock had either been eaten or rotted by now. Captain McFarley noticed where my gaze had gone, and gave a nod.
Help yourself. They're like to turn in a few days. May as well eat them.
I took one. It was just a tad too soft, but certainly still edible, and I placed it on the table beside me before reaching for a slice of bread.
I wanted to thank you for helping with my crew's injuries yesterday. Been a long while since we had a proper surgeon on board.
His eyes came close to glinting as he raised them towards me.
I trust everyone was agreeable.
Unconsciously, my heart began to pound as I thought back to the moment I'd had with Grayson last night, but I did my utmost to keep it from showing. Agreeable enough, I said stiffly. Captain McFarley's smile remained plastered across his face, though it somehow appeared less genuine the longer he wore it.
And I hope your letter has been coming along.
I nearly flinched. Truth be told, I hadn't touched the damn thing in days. I was still at a loss for what to write. I paused before responding, looking up at Captain McFarley warily. He raised a thick, quizzical eyebrow at me, bringing a slice of bread to his mouth and tearing off a chunk with his teeth. Yes, I said finally, for lack of anything else.
Good!
The smile widened.
We'll be reaching the Freeport in about a week. I'll expect you'll be finished with it by then.
A pit dropped into my stomach as I reached for the glass of water sitting beside me. A week had never sounded so short. Despite my efforts to hide behind my cup, my anxiety must have shown plain, because Captain McFarley took note of it with a chuckle.
Don't look so worried, my lady. I have every confidence in you. I'm sure you've got quite a way with words.
He reached for one of the oranges, giving it an experimental squeeze.
It's not just any woman who can charm Grayson, after all.
I nearly choked, but managed to keep the sound to a quiet cough, setting the glass down and struggling to maintain an even expression as I racked my brains for some way to respond. Captain McFarley almost looked amused, a smirk hiding behind the bushy beard. But the tension in the air suggested otherwise. I excused myself some minutes later, trying to calm the tumultuous storm of thoughts in my head. 1 week to write a letter that would ensure my own safety as well as that of my captors. 1 week to convince my father to, for once, choose a peaceful solution over a violent one. 1 week to keep myself from doing something stupid the next time Grayson looked at me with those brooding grey eyes. Returning to my cabin, I sat down and looked over my latest draft, scowling at the words on the parchment. It was still unsatisfactory. There was no good way for me to write this, I thought despairingly. The rest of the day seemed to pass very slowly as I sat in my little room and glared at the letter, writing and rewriting and searching desperately for the right words, all while fighting the nausea threatening to wash over me as I realized how pointless this all was. These pirates knew my father by name, but they didn't understand him. They had no idea what he was like, not the way I did. This was going to end in blood. The only question was whose. Before I knew it, the entire day was gone. I had to tear myself away from the desk in order to stretch and relieve the ache in my back. I didn't feel as though I had made much progress, but I knew that if I continued to stare at the parchment, I was going to lose my mind. I let out a breath and dropped my arms back to my sides as I looked at the door. Finn's leg was healing well enough that I probably didn't need to check on it again until tomorrow morning. But Grayson... I needed to make sure he hadn't torn his stitches again, as he was so prone to doing. But the mere thought of going to find him made my heart flutter. I bit my lip in a futile attempt to force myself back to my senses. This was ridiculous. Grayson was a bit rougher around the edges than what I was used to, but underneath all of that, he was no different from any other man I'd encountered. So why did my heart pulse like a 16-year-old girl's every time I thought of being alone with him? Shaking my head, I threw the door open, freeing myself from my self-imposed prison. I was just going to check his stitches. That was all. At this time, the place I was most likely to find Grayson was up on deck. That was where he often sought some solitude, while everyone else was drinking, sleeping, or playing cards in the mess hall. I made my way down the corridor and up the stairs, and was immediately greeted by a cold gust of air. Clutching my arms against my dress, I looked up. The sky was covered in a thick shroud of ominous clouds, which not only dimmed the moonlight, but gave distinct weight to the air around me. The sky looked as though it might open up at any moment to unleash a torrential onslaught of rain and winds. Lowering my eyes, I scanned the deck and found no sign of Grayson. Perhaps he was down below with the others after all. I was about to retreat to the safety of the ship's belly when movement caught my eye above. I glanced up, and, when I squinted, could just make out a figure up on the ship's rigging among the sails. There was only one person who would be up there at this time in the evening. My teeth clenched in annoyance. It wasn't the first time I had seen him working up there, held up only by the dubious tangle of nautical ropes and masts that always looked as though they needed fixing. I wouldn't have been surprised if that was how he'd ripped open his stitches the first time. Before I could think, I found myself marching towards the mast and calling up his name up into the wind. "Grayson!" He twisted around and looked down at me. Seeing his torso move like that made me wince, a sympathetic ache forming at my side, as I imagined how the movement must have felt. Still, if it bothered him, he didn't show it as he raised a hand to give me a wave. I let out a huff, already mentally drafting the scolding I was going to give him. He didn't make any move to descend, instead turning back towards the sail, so I could only assume he planned to disregard my obvious displeasure. What was he doing? I didn't know what the typical division of labor looked like on a pirate ship, but I was at least certain that manning the rigging was not the quartermaster's job. I could have waited for him to come down, but the chill in the air made me hesitant to stand still for much longer. As I glared up at him, I noticed the crow's nest not too far from where he hung. My eyes travelled to the ladder trailing from it, the base of which was just a few feet away from me. I swallowed and glanced back. But another distant bout of laughter confirmed that everyone was still down below. We were alone. My heart fluttered again, which only heightened my annoyance. I approached the ladder and began climbing as quickly as my feet would allow, lest I start to think harder about what I was doing and change my mind. Hand over hand, I cleared each wooden rung, trying not to wonder about their structural integrity, and by the time the next gust of wind hit me, it was too late to start regretting. I hoisted myself to the top, grabbing the railing that encircled the nest to steady myself. Grayson turned from where he was on the mizzenmast, with his feet entangled in the mess of a rope ladder that was still somehow holding him up.
Patience isn't your strong suit, eh?
he called over to me. I frowned at him. You're one to talk. Can't you sit still for a few days to let your wound close? I shot back.
So that's why you're here.
He turned back towards the sail that he was in the midst of tying up, looping an arm around the yard.
And I thought you just wanted to see me.
I pursed my lips. I hated to admit it, but I was impressed by his athleticism. He kept himself well balanced up there, hardly swaying at all, even with the harsh wind. However, this only reminded me of the strain that he was putting on himself, and I scowled. Could you come down from there before you tear the stitches again? Assuming you haven't done so already. Grayson scoffed. He was no longer facing me, but I could practically hear him rolling his eyes.
One moment.
Grayson pulled the knot tight, and then, with surprising speed and grace, pushed himself off the mast, swinging towards the crow's nest. He stepped deftly off the ladder and onto the railing without missing a beat. I took a step backwards in surprise, feeling dizzy just watching the maneuver. But he was wholly unbothered as he hopped down into the nest and lifted his shirt, turning his side towards me.
See, nothing to worry about.
I blinked. Much to my surprise, the stitches were still intact. I stepped closer to examine them.
Don't look so shocked. I am being careful.
With a breath, I lifted my gaze back towards him. Isn't there someone else who ought to be doing this? I asked, with a nod towards the sail he had just finished rolling up. He shrugged.
I enjoy doing it. Besides, no one's knots are as good as mine.
There was a hint of pride in his tone as he informed me of this, glancing up at the sky.
Has to be done before the storm comes in, and there's no reason to disturb the others when I can finish the job quicker and better on my own.
In a way, this came as no surprise to hear, but I bit back the comment working its way to my tongue and straightened. He didn't lower his shirt, a devious smile creeping onto his face.
Did you enjoy it?
Enjoy what?
The view.
It took a moment to understand what he was getting at, trying to make me blush again. Determined not to let it work, I cleared my throat dismissively. Charming, I deadpanned. London women must be truly starved for affection, if half-crooked words like those were enough to swoon them. The retort flew out of my mouth before I could really think about it. But luckily, Grayson didn't seem to mind, and laughed, finally lowering his shirt. Once again, I found his smile bleeding onto my own face. But remembering my conversation with Captain McFarley this morning, quickly chased it away. I chewed on the inside of my lip. I hesitated a moment. I hope I didn't get you into any trouble last night. Grayson's smile faded as he cocked a brow, puzzled.
Trouble?
He repeated. Then he seemed to understand.
No, nothing like that.
He said, and shook his head.
We just discussed a change in strategy is all.
He pressed his lips together, with something that seemed vaguely like discomfort.
That ship that attacked us yesterday wasn't well equipped enough to be a military vessel. We can only assume it attacked us because your father has placed a bounty on the Libertas.
I had also suspected as much. I swallowed and nodded. I'm not surprised, I said.
Well, it just makes your role all the more crucial,
he commented. The letter. It was difficult not to cringe.
In the meantime, we'll have to make adjustments to our route.
seeking a change in subject. I cleared my throat and looked up at the sails, now neatly folded and bound against the yard. "Why did you chase noble women anyway?" I blurted out. "Why didn't you just... surely there were..." I knew the word for what I was trying to describe, but was struggling to find a more ladylike way to say it. "I'm certain that London has no shortage of women of the night." Grayson shook his head, mouth curling into an unapologetic smirk.
I don't like to pay for it. Where's the fun in that?
He leaned towards me ever so slightly, a movement that wouldn't have even been noticeable had we not been sharing a very small space.
Chasing after them was half the fun.
A snake in my lower stomach stirred, and I swallowed. "Spoken like a true pirate, I suppose," I said. My eyes landed on the leftover rope he had brought down from the rigging, and I continued to speak without considering what I was saying. "Is that why you're so good at knots, then? Was that how you ended your chase?" It had been a joke, but Grayson's expression shifted, and I saw something in his eyes changed as he followed my gaze to the rope and answered.
The knots we use for sailing are quite different from those you would use on a person,
He told me, in all seriousness. "And you know both types?" The corner of his mouth twitched.
Why? Would you like a demonstration?
My breath caught in my throat. I wasn't able to come up with a witty response before his hand whipped out and scooped both of my wrists together, giving them a tug to stretch them outwards. He paused and locked eyes with me, my arms captured in one hand, while the other had already grabbed hold of the excess rope. His grip wasn't tight. I could have pulled away. In fact, from the way he had stopped so suddenly and began watching my face, I had a feeling that he was waiting for me to pull away, giving me the chance to put an end to this strange game. Somewhere deep in my mind, I knew that I should. But the thought was soon dulled by a haze settling over me. Reassured that I wasn't going to object, he brought the rope to my hands, and in one swift movement looped it over my wrists.
If I were tying down a sail, for example, I'd do it like this.
His hands moved with such speed and precision that it was hard to follow their movements. A few moments later, I was bound with a complex-looking knot, but I only got to examine it for a second before he immediately began to undo it with deft fingers.
If I wanted to tie someone up,
He continued,
then I'd do it like this.
He released me briefly while he folded the rope in half, then wrapped it around my hands, threading the ends through the loop and pulling it taut. He made several more passes around, and then wound the rope vertically in between my wrists, cinching the bonds snugly and finishing them off by knotting them underneath, well out of reach of my fingers. My skin pulsed as I gave an experimental tug. The rope chafed slightly, but wasn't too uncomfortable. At the same time, it was secure. Grayson looked pleased with his work, face affixed with that mischievous smile when I looked up at him.
See the difference?
I swallowed, suddenly finding that my mouth had gone dry. "Should I be concerned about your apparent skill in this area?" I asked, trying half-heartedly to make light of the situation. "How many other noble women have you abducted over the years?"
Not as many as you think.
His smile widened.
It does come in handy for subduing unruly captives, though.
He gave the ends of the rope dangling from my wrists a playful pull, jerking my hands towards him. If I were truly an unruly captive, I could just push you over the side of the crow's nest, I pointed out, tugging back. His eyebrows shot up in what almost seemed to be delight.
First of all, you are an unruly captive,
he remarked, but then let go of the rope.
Second, you are more than welcome to try.
He took a backward step towards the edge of the crow's nest, taunting. I stared at him bemusedly as I wondered if he was serious. The way he was standing there and grinning at me like a fox suggested as much. I glanced down at my bound hands, and then back at him. His smile twitched.
Go on,
he prompted. Perhaps he didn't think I would really do it. My own stubborn nature got the better of me, and I took an uncertain step towards him, determined to call his bluff. I didn't get far. In fact, I didn't even touch him before his hand shot out and grabbed hold of my wrist, pulling them up and over my head. I stumbled in surprise, and before I fully understood what was happening, I found myself landing on my rear end with my back against the railing. Grayson had the end of the rope in one hand, and he was using it to pull my hands up and backwards so that they were locked behind my head. He clicked his tongue in disappointment.
Surely you could have done better than that.
I pulled instinctively, but he kept my hands trapped in place. I made the mistake of looking up and meeting his gaze. I was once again, as I so often was, much closer to him than I had intended to be, and I had to fight to keep the blood from rushing to my face. I let out a breath of air, forcing myself to frown. I don't think that was entirely fair, I said weakly. He chuckled.
I never said I was fair.
I felt his hand moving, and suddenly he pulled away with a grin. I tried to draw my arms back in front of me, but they remained stuck. I twisted around and caught a peripheral glimpse of the end of the rope, now bound to the railing behind me. I heard Grayson stifling a laugh as he watched me come to this realization, and I turned back to face him, pressing my lips together in what was partly annoyance and partly another feeling that I couldn't quite describe.
And just like that, my unruly captive has been dealt with,
he said, unable to keep the smile from his face. Very funny, I muttered. A sensation that I wasn't sure I cared for was forming in my lower stomach, creeping its way into the area between my legs and telling me that it was time for this to stop before I did anything I might regret. You've made your point, I told him, giving a tug on my wrists. Would you kindly release me now?
All right.
He reached back towards me. Then
Hi!
there came a shout from below, freezing us both in place.